Just got to work on my gut, that's all. Show those girls what I'm made of, yeah. But what about you, Hardy? 'Cause I gotta tell you, these days, you're looking more and more like a corpse. You ever sleep? You ever fuck? Maybe you should consider packing up yourself. You ever thought about that? Going somewhere else? Making a new start? For a long time, Hardy didn't respond. Then he shook his head and frowned. No, never thought about it. But I don't think it matters much where you go, because you're always stuck with yourself, day and night, week after week after week. Klein glanced at Hardy, and then back at the slick blacktop. Well, shit. Thank you for that. That's a fucking depressing sentiment if I ever heard one. A few minutes more, and the car slowed to a stop, and Hardy stared through the rain-blurred windshield at the derelict motel just ahead. A place he'd been before. There were a dozen or so drab yellow units, a handful of them boarded up. The Breezewood Motel, it said in broken red and blue neon. A rusted metal office sign hung from a corner unit, and a cutout silhouette of a cowboy leaned against the wall. A crowd of people were milling around, whispering what they knew, whispering what they'd heard. And now, staring at the motel, Hardy felt a sense of despair that he'd never felt before, a despair that, he was sure, no amount of time or tears could ever heal. He didn't want to go in. He didn't want to see the blood. His own hands weren't even yet dry. Klein killed the engine and radioed in their location. They stepped out of the car, the wind whipping around, the rain falling sideways. And then that old thought. Maybe none of this was real. Not the rain, nor the wind, nor the death. Maybe. Hardy remembered when he was a child, bedridden because of pneumonia, and one night, in the throes of relentless fever, he had a terrible dream. In the dream, he was wandering across the desert, lost. All around him was death and carnage, rivers of blood, bodies on the highway, maimed children begging for help. And so he ran and ran, a mortise key hanging around his neck, and eventually he came to his neighborhood, and finally to his house. But then he noticed that next to his house was another one that was identical in every way, and he became unsure about which was the real one. He heard screams, and when he glanced behind, the wounded children were closing in on him, dragging themselves across the dirt, and he had to pick a house. He chose the house on the left. He used his key to open the door, and when he stepped inside, he saw his parents sitting in the living room, his father reading the newspaper, his mother knitting a sweater. They greeted him with hugs and smiles, but even though they looked and sounded and acted like his parents, he felt something was wrong, that perhaps they were imposters, that his real parents were in the house on the right. And even after he woke, when he saw them, he doubted that they were real, feared that at any moment they would tear the skin off their faces, revealing hideous new ones beneath, and drag him back to the nightmare from which he'd come. "Just look at this dump," Klein said. "I'm telling you, some gasoline and a book of matches." Hardy pulled back his wetted hair and surveyed the scene. The poor and the mangled huddled in the parking lot, bathrobes slipped open, cans of Budweiser crushed in hands, mumbling fragmented narratives at the weeds and asphalt beneath their feet. One of them mentioned how the devil was making nightly appearances at this motel. Another remembered her Aunt Riddle, who died a year ago Wednesday from a mysterious plague. And a third swore that blood was seeping beneath the motel door and would soon cover the parking lot, spread to the avenue, and make its way to City Hall. Hardy and Klein stepped through the crowd toward room 6. An older woman with a mouthful of gums grabbed Hardy's arm and said, "How long's she been dead, you think? A week, maybe more? Just rotting, rotting, rotting. It don't matter, though. Not to me. Just another dead whore. There's plenty more like her, crawling beneath the bridge and creeping around in alleys." The manager had relocked the door after the discovery, so the deputies had to wait several minutes for the Brillo-haired woman to return with the key. "Don't know who she is," she said, even though neither of the deputies had asked. "I just came to get money owed. Wouldn't have opened the door if it wasn't for that stench." Her hands were unsteady, Parkinson's, and it was a challenge for her to get the key in the hole. The crowd murmured in